Hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Joseph Pith and this is the Pith Take, episode 1. Having done an introduction, and that's the only content on the channel so far, I painfully had to watch it at least a couple of times. Points of note: 1, this doesn't help with the monotone voice, definitely makes it worse. Point of note 2, couldn't help but notice that I seem to say "to be fair" quite a lot, so I'll try and pull myself up on that. I can't be having that. So episode 1, apparently it's grim up north. For anyone not familiar with the UK, more specifically England, there's a long-running societal meme of a north and south divide. Quite where that north-south divide lies is debatable, but and there's actually emerging thought that this is something that goes back hundreds of years, but it seems to have really it's something that has come out of diverging sort of economic pathways, and obviously around the time of the Industrial Revolution in the UK. And that's the thing that really cemented this idea of a north-south divide in the public consciousness. So you had northern towns and cities grew into sort of huge manufacturing hubs and sort of centres of trade, while there was trade and manufacturing developed in the south as well, but really not on the same scale and not with the same intensity, and definitely not with the same prevalence for sort of heavy industry. The south saw a lot of growth in commerce and sort of other industries that would have orbited that. So there was this real defined economic sort of division, which was sort of off the back of that perpetuated cultural tropes which still persist today. I mean, on that today, that's kind of flipped, because through the death of heavy industry in the north and the growth of service industries and the whole service sector in the south, so both kind of economic poles played into this perception of it being grim up north. You had, whilst it was a real behemoth of industry and really active industrially, that was the thing that cast it as being grim. And then when that was taken away, similarly this kind of sudden deprivation and lack of industry also painted it as being grim. So what I actually wanted to talk about in this episode was the point of view that I have, being someone who grew up in the north of England and has I feel had very deep connection to where my roots in the north of England, but now live in the south. So is it grim up north? I grew up in Oldham, which is a town in Lancashire, in the northwest of England, which, I mean, not so much now, which is awful, but, you know, how long ago, you know, maybe a month or so ago, was all over the popular media for the whole issues around the grooming gangs. So I grew up in Oldham in the 1980s, and there were even then in the 80s there were specific kind of long established ethnic enclaves, and it really shouldn't be. I mean, I hope it's not controversial to say it shouldn't be. It's just a statement of fact that there were and still are areas that are predominantly they're Pakistani neighbourhoods. That's just fact. It shouldn't be controversial. I mean, and to me, logically, it kind of makes sense. If you've come to a new country, an unfamiliar country, of course you're going to gravitate to people who are already in the country from the culture that you've come from. That's probably a subject for another episode. So as a child, my interaction with those communities was pretty limited. I did have quite a lot of Pakistani friends at school, but we never went to their houses, and that's not because we didn't want to or wouldn't have wanted to. They advised against it. Not so much going to their house, but they definitely advised against the idea of going through that neighbourhood to get to their house. On a couple of occasions we sort of inadvertently found ourselves in this specific, I think it's Westwood neighbourhood in Oldham, on our way back from somewhere or other, and both times we left at full sprint with a fairly large group of people in pursuit. So everyone knew you didn't go in those neighbourhoods. Has that changed today? I don't, although I don't live in the area anymore. As I said, I have family who do live close by. I visit a lot. I don't see much change. So I moved from the northwest in my late teens with my family. My family moved and I moved with them to the southeast of England. And you'd think, well, it's the same country, so if it's a few hundred miles away, how different could it be? But yeah, it was an actual shock. I think my first impression of the south was like, why is everything so green? Now don't get me wrong. Where we lived in Oldham, there were green spaces, and there were green spaces like 5 minutes from our house. There was farmland and playing fields, real close by, really. But it was the shock was like the streets and roadsides, and there was grass verges, trees, any kind of sort of I don't know, like any kind of available space seemed to be a park, or it was quite different when you've grown up in a sort of terraced house, like a 2 up 2 down terraced house. I stick a picture in for anyone not familiar. This kind of Coronation Street style. Our house, the front door of our house opened directly out onto the street, onto the pavement. We had a backyard. Again, for anyone not familiar with that, backyard is just like a small paved area at the back of the house, generally walled in, but very, very small. So much green was a bit of a shock. Only posh houses had gardens around, where we lived. So I guess like most places in the UK, north or south, where there's any town or city you go to, you will find there's a scale of deprivation. The neighbourhood where I grew up was somewhere in the middle, I'd say. Not a crumbling kind of crime-infested hellhole, but likewise not sort of cocktail parties and pampas grass. That's a proper 80s reference. If you know about pampas grass, I'd say. But you're not aware growing up of your status or your circumstance, and when you do become aware, because we were definitely working class. There was no denying that. My ancestry and socio-economic status, working class for sure. Well, when you do become aware of that, it seems like you either embrace it and have some pride in it and celebrate it, or you kind of try to deny it. And I'd say, if you're in that latter group, you might need to get a grip a little. So from here on, I am definitely going to get a bit rambly, because I had some notes, and I'm going from notes to bullet points, so you have to accept my apologies. So as I said, it was definitely shocking to come from the north to the south, and this is like early 90s. But likewise, so later in life when I got married, and my wife is not a girly girl. She is not prim and proper. She's lovely, but she grew up in a working class household in the southeast of England. So she is not like prissy and sort of princess-like. So she's not easily shocked, is what I guess I'm trying to say. So the first time we visited the north and visited my family, it was a literal culture shock for her. Everything about it, actually, I guess, but particularly the neighbourhoods. It's very different. It's hard to explain, but it is very different. I think there's rundown areas in every town and city across the UK, north or south, but there does seem to be a lot more in the north, and obviously that's as a result of kind of entire industries ceasing to exist. Towns and cities heavily relied upon certain industries, and when they just stopped, obviously they didn't just stop, there was reasons behind it, but coal, steel, cotton, you're going back away with cotton, but they were gone, and they supported entire economies, and as a result those towns became forgotten. And so seeing that firsthand for my wife on that occasion was similarly shocking to me, coming down this way and kind of being like, why is it so green? And as a result of things closing down, there's less opportunity, and that's just a fact. It's part of the reason my parents chose to move to where and when they did, because they had a kind of view of providing us, their children, with opportunities that we may not have where we were living. That's not to say there aren't beautiful places in the north. There are. I've got family who live in amazing. In fact, as a sort of antidote to having visited family in a really urban area, which was quite eye-opening for my wife, and I was aware that she was a bit sort of taken aback by it all. We went to visit another family member who lives in a idyllic rural village, amazing, picture postcard kind of thing that Americans would swoon over. And so of course there are beautiful places in the north of England, so you can't just kind of sort of paint it all with this brush where everything's crumbling and crime-ridden and falling apart. As a slight aside, it's a weird one, because I talked about it in my introduction video, the accent. It's frustrating. There shouldn't be. There's so many, again, for anyone not familiar with the UK or even just specifically England, there are such a lot of different regional accents, and they've developed over centuries, and they are what they are, and it has no impact on, or it shouldn't have any impact on your perception of a person. But there is this lingering, horrible stereotype of a kind of, it's hard to even know how to put it, but there is this stereotype of a northern accent, whether that's Lancashire, Yorkshire, further afield, the northeast. There's this lingering kind of thing whereby you're viewed as a bit lesser just on the basis of an accent. It's ridiculous, says he with this weird nothing nowhere accent, but that's an aside. So I don't really have, and I was just talking about accents, but I don't really have any kind of hard and fast format for what I'm going to do with the episodes yet, and so this is definitely going to be jumping from pillar to post. I kind of covered what I wanted to, but I know I haven't really. I wasn't trying to answer the question, is it grim up north particularly, but if you're a southerner, you probably, unless you've been to the north more than once, then you may have the general consensus that it is. And if you're a northerner, as much as you may love your roots, you do, if you're honest, you probably would admit that there are some parts of towns and cities that are borderline wastelands. Well, obviously you've still got to accept that there's towns and cities across the north and south that have kind of rundown areas. I was thinking perhaps the litmus test would be, would I move back to the area that I grew up in? The answer, very sadly, is no, but not really for the reasons that have grounded those sort of old claims of it being grim up north. Those kind of industrial blah blah blah, that kind of industrial, I don't know how to put it, that that older reasoning of why it's grim up north, actually, if that was the issue, that wouldn't be an issue for me, because I loved where I grew up. But now the area where I grew up is simply not the same neighbourhood as it was 35, 40 years ago. Demographically, it has just changed beyond recognition, really. And on that, as I was saying earlier, if there was a deprivation scale, it's going from kind of middling to nosediving to somewhere close to the bottom. And I actually feel it sounds... No, I do. I actually feel really sad about that, because an actual, genuine loss, like a sense of loss about that, because there's generations of people who like forged the identity of that place where I grew up and other places, and it's just kind of been swept away as if it just didn't happen. Like these places just appeared, and the population, particularly where I used to live, the population that's there now, I don't get a sense that they have a connection to the place. You know, the streets and the homes where they're living, and with that kind of lack of connection, I think comes a sort of lack of care for the environment that you live in. I always, whenever I am back up north, I always visit my old neighbourhood, have a wander around, and you know, it's instantly apparent from a brief walk around that what were the streets of my childhood are neglected severely. You know, people used to take pride in just kind of keeping their little bit nice, and generally the whole area somewhat presentable. And those streets are just that literal rat's nest of fly tipping, derelict houses, abandoned shopping trolleys. Now, I'm not saying I'm not saying it was like some kind of polished, amazing, beautiful place when we grew up. It was, you know, it was a bit grotty, but people still had some sort of pride in their homes and the general appearance of the place, and that just seems to have been abandoned. But somehow you'll see every other house has some kind of luxury car out the front. So I guess it comes down to priorities, doesn't it? What do you want, a car or a sweat? And I don't know. Anyway, I'm definitely rambling. Sorry. Got to close this before I do more of that. So yeah, I guess no doubt the old adage, the kind of it's grim up north, it will live on, won't it? Even in part because, you know, it's a low-key divisive, isn't it? Divided people are easier to control. So I think I'll leave it there. See you on the next one.